This is a story about the most interesting man in the world. When I was young and frivolous, I made my way to the city of Rio de Janeiro. I wanted to see the world then, and I had only intended to stay in Rio for a few days before moving on in my travels. But several days quickly turned into several weeks. In my naiveness, I believed that this city was the world. After all, what more could there be to see? What else could the rest of the world have to offer that I could not already have at my fingertips in my small but elegant hotel room overlooking the ocean? One night, as I wandered the boulevards, my ears perked up at a sound that I had never heard before. To the indifferent ear, it was simply the strum of an acoustic guitar, but to me, it was a stream of dulcet, sensuous tones drifting towards me from some otherworldly place that I could not explain. My feet began to follow the sound, as if bidden by this mysterious six-string Pied Piper. I found myself in a neighborhood I had never explored before, outside a small cafe I had never been to. A small crowd surrounded what seemed to be the source of the music, and I gently pushed my way through to the front. And that's when I saw him, the most interesting man in the world. Dressed in a dark suit, he played with his eyes closed, his head occasionally swaying in time with the music, as his fingers, lithe and nimble as a cat, worked their way up and down the strings of the fretboard. He opened his eyes, like two chunks of obsidian glinting in the firelight. He looked at me. Life had never meant anything to me until that moment. After he finished playing, I approached him. We sat at a little table and had a glass of wine. I talked endlessly about nothing. He never spoke, but listened very carefully, his dark eyes gently fixated on me, a small crooked smile forming in the corner of his mouth. After a while, he stood up, took my hand, and kissed it ever so gently. He leaned in close and whispered so softly that I could barely hear him. He said, "Tú eres la razón de mi vida." And with that, he walked away, climbed on the back of a small white horse that stood nearby, and rode off as the sun began to rise. For the next 30 nights, I went back to that cafe. He was never there. I never saw him again. Not long after that, I returned home. I no longer had any desire to remain in Rio, and the thought of traveling any further simply exhausted me.